Why do auditors need to think about controls? Let's talk about that. Why? The major reason why it is so important is because auditors want to know if they can place reliance on the controls. And what does that mean? Auditors want to know whether they can trust the system. Yeah, because they need to check what the audit risk is all about. Remember, we have looked at audit risk, which I'm going to do a quick revision for you again. But just follow me closely. Why are they interested in controls? Because they want to know whether they can place reliance on control, right? So if they can place reliance on control, if they've checked that control and they said, yes, we can place reliance on control, what this means is that what they are trying to tell you is that control risk is low. And if they say no, we cannot place reliance, then that means control risk is high. Control risk is high. That's what they are saying there. Yeah, and what is control risk? When we talk about control risk is a risk that control will fail to achieve its objective. That is, control will not prevent the risk that it's trying to prevent. Their failure to achieve control objective. So which means is as saying that no control, or you can say poor control. That's what control risk is all about. Yeah. So what you are saying here is that possibility is low here, and here that possibility is high. That's what you're saying there. And that is what auditors are trying to check out for. Yeah. And why is control risk important? Remember what audit risk is. I always tell you, anytime you hear risk is whatever prevents you from achieving your objective. So when you hear of audit risk, I know we dealt with this in the previous video. Quick reminder. Audit risk will prevent you from achieving audit objective. And what is audit objective? Audit objective is to issue right opinion about financial statement. Yeah. So there are three components. I remember I told you there is inherent risk. There's inherent, there is control risk, and there is detection risk. Yeah. So this is what we are looking at now. This is associated with the nature of the industry and business. And this is auditors. The auditors being able to do their work appropriately. Yeah. Now, control risk is about the controls, that the risk that control will fail. Right? So, which means auditors need to see if they can rely on it. And why do you think they want to rely on it? They want to rely on it because, why reliance? Reliance, the reason why they need to rely on it is because it helps their audit approach. And when I'm talking of audit approach, I'm talking about amount of work to be done. Please, this is very important. Because if the control risk is high, which means poor control, yeah, good control. So take for instance, there's poor control, which means high control risk. Please note that auditors will do huge amount of work. High amount. But if the control is good, which means low control risk, then auditors will do low amounts of work. And I'm using basic terminology like this because we've not gotten into section D, which is on substantive testing. This low and high amount of work that I'm talking about is about substantive testing. Yeah, in case if you have done this paper before, you will be able to relate better now. You start making sense to you. But if it's the first time, just keep following me like this. Yeah, gradually you will build that confidence and understanding. Right. So remember, the summary of what I'm saying is, auditors are interested in control because they want to place reliance on it. And reliance on it means that they will use it to know whether they need to do so much work or so little work. Yeah, if the control is good, then they don't have to do so much work, but they will still do some work. I mean, some substantive testing. However, if the control is poor from their review, then they will need to do a lot of substantive testing. Very important, right? So, in order for auditors to conclude, yeah, whether the control is good or not, auditors must test controls in 2 dimensions. Yeah, and I will explain them to you. 2 dimensions. They must test, first of all, the design. Let me talk about the design first. The design of the control. So design and operation of the control. Both of that must be tested. Design is to check whether control is good enough to mitigate the risk. Whereas operation is to check if control is being used as designed. And let me give you a good example. Let's say we look at cash. Think about cash. Right? The risk with cash is that someone might steal the cash. Yeah, that is a risk. Then you say, okay, I'm going to design a control for that. And the control I'm going to design is a reconciliation, so that if anybody is even trying to steal the cash, the reconciliation will catch the person and we can fire that person, or before the person even runs away, we can collect our money back from that person. That is the design, reconciliation. Then you say, we'll ensure we do this reconciliation every month. So in terms of design, that's a very good design. And it's fine. Monthly reconciliation. But think about it. If the staff that is meant to do that monthly reconciliation has not been doing it every month, he does it as he feels happy. Maybe he will do it in January, he will not do it February, March, April, does it in June, does it in September, then the operation of that control is poor. And in that case, though the design is good, the operation is bad, and auditors must conclude that the control is bad and cannot place reliance on it. So before auditors can conclude, they must have checked both the design and operation effectiveness of every control. And the question is, how do they go about it? How do auditors go about this? There are 4 steps that auditors must follow, which makes just sense. Right, makes just sense. The first one is auditors must understand the process. Yeah, must understand the process where the control is being used. So auditors must understand, because you cannot even evaluate or test whatever you don't understand. Once they obtain that understanding, then you must document it. Remember when we talked about ISQC in the previous video, documentation is very important. So you must document it. Yeah, you can use flow chart or narrations. Then once you are done documenting it, then it's time to evaluate. Which means you now sit down and review and check these controls that I'm looking at in front of me. Is it good enough to prevent the risk that is involved in this process? When you are trying to do this evaluation, what you are checking is what is called the design effectiveness, like I explained just earlier. Because it's good to do this first. If you don't do this first, there is no point going to this fourth stage, which is testing. If the design is already bad, then there is no point testing the operating effectiveness, because in testing, what you are now checking is the operation to see whether the control is being operated the way it has been designed. That's what you're trying to do. Right. So, you understand it, you document it, you evaluate it, then you can test it. But you only test when the design is good, which means your evaluation is good. So if this is only done if evaluation is positive results. Please take note, because it's a waste of time checking, testing operation of a control that you have concluded has been badly designed. If it's badly designed, you've concluded that it's badly designed because it cannot stop the risk that is involved. An example is if the risk is that someone is going to steal the data of an organization, but instead of you locking the computer with password, what you try to do is to say our control is to ensure that our computers are kept in the drawer. That doesn't make sense. It's kept in the drawer. Even people don't even need physical access to that computer to steal the data. Someone can log on remotely and still steal the data. Someone can go in and open the drawers and open the laptop and take the data. So I don't need to even check that you are putting the computer inside the drawer. So I won't test it. I can conclude that the controls you have described to me is not good, and I cannot test it, and I'm not going to rely on it. Because for auditors, you are only testing such that you can rely on it. Very important. So now that we know how they go about getting this reliance, they understand the document and evaluate. Usually, the way you will be tested in exams is you need to be able to summarize control in the way I'm going to put it down for you. First of all, you need to know the risk that you are trying to mitigate. The exam can call it risk, they can call it weakness. They can also call it threat. So threat is another way they can call it. So you must know all of that. They will say you identify the threat in the process. Once you identify the threat, they will now ask you to talk about the control objective. What is the control objective? And what will be your control activity that you will propose to the management? And how will you test that control? So they will ask you to come up with a test procedure. Then obviously you get the results. And based on the results you have, you can conclude. Right. So usually you must be able to do this, and this will be our live in the next couple of videos for all the processes that we are required to get familiar with. But let me explain what all of this is talking about. Yeah, I know I've said some things about them previously, but let me say more. Right. So remember, for every process, for every process, there are risks involved, there are threats involved, there are weaknesses involved. So let's take, for instance, inventory process. I'm going to go into details later for each process, but let's just use inventory to explain each of these columns. Right. So take, for instance, a weakness in inventory can be a possible, or the risk can be theft of inventory. This is about what could go wrong, the first column. Yeah, this part. You are saying what could go wrong. That is a risk. You can never assume that nothing can go wrong. You can never assume that it's very unlikely. Well, even if it is unlikely, you still need to identify it. When you get to your risk assessment, then you can now be determine whether it is likely or maybe the impact is very low. You can do your risk assessment like that, because remember, risk assessment is about impact analysis. It's about possibility, right? Right. So let's say there's a risk of theft of inventory. Then your control objective is to prevent that. So usually you always start your control objective by saying to ensure. Now, what do you want to ensure? To ensure that inventory is secured. Because if it is secured, then there won't be theft. The question is now, how will you ensure your objective? So control activity is about how. So you can say, we'll make sure that our warehouse is locked. And we can also say that, we will do inventory count every quarter. You can see these are activities, these are example of controls. Now, as auditors, how will you test these controls? So you will need to understand the process, you will document it, you will evaluate it before you test it. Remember, by the time you are talking of testing, you have already evaluated. It means you've done step 1, you've done step 2, you've done step 3, then now you want to test. Because truly, this will be good to prevent theft. So the evaluation is good. Now we want to test. So your test procedure can be, how do you check that warehouse is always locked truly? You can do an inspection of the warehouse. So your procedure will always be tailored against your control activity. So you can inspect the warehouse to see whether it's truly locked. And likewise, you can ask for previous inventory count reports to check that truly they've been doing it every quarter. Likewise, you can reperform the count yourself to confirm that the inventory balance on the financial statement is the same thing as the physical inventory they have in the warehouse. So those are the controls. So those are the tests of the controls. So now that you're done testing, if your result is good, then you can conclude that the control risk is low. But if it is bad, then that means control risk will be high. But if it is good, it is low. Right. And based on that, you will determine how much work that needs to be done. So when you have done all of this, then you can now update your audit approach as to how do you progress from here, which is about the amount of substantive work that needs to be done. Like I said, we are not looking at substantive work in this section. That is section D, which we will do later when we are done with test of control. Right. So that is it. When you discover that the control risk is high, there is a requirement. So think about it. You've done all this testing, you've seen your result, and we said the conclusion will be based on the result. Please take note. When your conclusion based on your result is saying that the audit control risk is high, which means you have identified some weaknesses in control. If there are weaknesses in control, meaning some controls are bad and you're not able to rely on those controls, every weakness that is significant that you have identified must be reported. Please take notes. Must be reported to those charged with corporate governance. Remember, they're the ones that design the control. So they must know that the controls that they have designed is not working or is not being operationalized properly. This is a requirement by IIC. you must report it. And how do you report it? You report it through preparation of what we call management letter. That is how you report your weakness that you have found. And management letter is always in two sections. There's section 1 and there is a section 2. The section 1 of your management letter is just the cover letter, where you put the address, the title, the objective, the summary of findings. And section 2 is the appendix, which is much more detailed. Yeah, so your appendix is usually like this, 3 column. For each weakness that you found, you must prepare like this 3 column. Look at it. You're going to have the weakness column, which will document the weakness that you have found. The second column is the consequence, because they need to know why you are reporting it. Because if there is no consequence, then why are you reporting it? So you let them know the weakness, the consequence, and you don't stop there. Don't be a bad guy that is just looking for problem. Once you see a problem, recommend a solution. So you need to give them a recommendation as well, how they can mitigate the weakness. Take for instance, if you discover that reconciliation is not being done every month, so that's a weakness. The consequence is that when cash is stolen, you don't get to know on time, and you might be reporting wrong cash balance against the physical cash that you have. That's a consequence, which is fraud, bad. Loss of asset, and when you are losing asset as a company, you are dying, right? And what's the recommendation? Ensure that reconciliation is done every month, and maybe a review. You can also recommend that they should do a review of reconciliation every month, right? So that is how we'll be approaching our study for the next few recordings, and I've been able to give you a summary of what control is and why we need to test controls. However, your syllabus now requires you to understand processes and controls for 5 processes, right, which your exams can be tested. And this is what I will take in each recording in next set of videos. There are 5 of them, 5 processes that we are mandated to cover. The first one is the sale process. We have the purchases. We have the payroll process. We have the inventory. And lastly, cash and bank. So these are the processes we will look at individually. We will understand the process. We need to look at the risk, the control objective, the controls, and the way we can test those controls. Just like this table that I've prepared, because this is a typical way. Your exams on internal control cannot come outside of this table that I've given you. Never. And it won't come outside of these 5 processes as well. So if you can have that table for each of these processes, then you are home and dry. And remember, internal control is a big chunk of your syllabus. So I want to be very comfortable with it. Whether you have done audit before or not, you will have this covered by me. On to the next video. Remember, keep liking, keep subscribing, share it, and I'll see you in the next class. Bye now.